I didn't oppose an objection at this point.
Would you state your full name, spell your last name, and speak into the mic, please?
Dr. Isidore Mihalakis, Mihalakis.
This witness, the man who did Lise Bias's autopsy, Warren County Coroner Isidore Mihalakis.
I'm going to ask you whether or not you recognize what's contained in that envelope.
Yes, I do recognize it.
And what do you recognize it to be, and how do you recognize it?
This is the hair that I clipped from Ms. Bias and surrendered to the police.
Now, the hair was clipped from the location surrounding the wound track.
And surrounding the wound of entry.
Did you wash this hair before you surrendered it to the police?
No, I did not.
Why not?
Because washing the hair washes what I want the police to examine.
And what is it that you want the police to examine for?
I want them to examine for gunshot residue.
Okay. What is gunshot residue?
Gunshot residue is a sum total of all the contents that come out of the muzzle at the time that a gun is fired. We're looking for any strands which would tell us to whether or not there was an exposure to heat as in fire. Where did this fire come from? This fire comes from the muzzle of the weapon, because when a weapon is fired, gunpowder is ignited, and from the muzzle, which is the front end of the gun, there comes out a bullet, powder, and some flame.
Do you have an opinion, doctor, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to how far the muzzle of that weapon was from the head of Lisa Bias when it was fired?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is your opinion, doctor?
The range of fire was distant beyond the range of self-infliction.
Now, how did you come to that opinion, doctor?
That opinion was arrived at by the absence of any deposits on the scalp surface. The absence of any blackening, powder, singeing, searing. Self-infliction refers to the muzzle to target distance. We know that Ms. Bias had an arm reach from the axilla to the tip of the index finger of 23.5 inches, from the scalp surface to the tip of the index finger of 30 inches, holding this kind of a gun, with the finger in the trigger, the index finger in the trigger. It is impossible to hold it at a sufficient length that it would not result in some deposition.
Deposition of what, doctor?
Gunshot residue, Mr. Russell.
I would refer you to page 4 of your autopsy report. You have that in front of you, do you not? And that indicates that you performed gentle rinsing, does it not, sir?
Well, I think we just cannot take the words gentle rinsing out of context,
It
Counselor.
indicates that you did perform gentle rinsing, does it not, sir?
I cannot answer the question in the manner in which it was put to me because it's taken out of context, Counselor.
Would you answer the question, doctor?
May I have the question again, please, Counselor?
Does your report on page 4 indicate that at the time you clipped the hair, you performed gentle rinsing?
At the time that I clipped the hair, again, I admit the words gentle rinsing are in the report. This I will grant you. However, they are taken out of context and potentially misleading in that the sequence that it occurred is not addressed.
Dr. Mihalakis, you're aware that Mr. Bias contends that the gun went off when he was attempting to disarm his wife.
Yes, ma'am, I'm aware of that.
And you're aware that Mr. Bias says that he put his hand over his wife's hand and he pulled on her arm, correct?
That is correct.
And is it not possible that the pulling on her arm would cause her head to go to the left and would result in the wound track that you're talking about. I'm not talking about distance now. I'm talking about direction.
Quite frankly, no. Primarily because if he's pulling, then we should end up with an upward shot. And we have essentially a horizontal shot.
But if he pulls and her head moves, we could end up with that wound track, could we not, Doctor?
Well, that in part, that's correct, Mrs. Smith.
Okay, that's the answer to my question, Doctor. If he pulls...
It's not the answer to your question because I said...
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
The prosecutor calls on a series of other experts.
Can you tell this jury whether or not there is any way in which that gun would have fired had the trigger not been pulled?
No.
Do you have an opinion, sir, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that if a weapon is held parallel to a left shoulder, that is, the gun is being held in the left hand, and if that weapon is discharged in close proximity to the head, whether or not you would have found gunshot residue on the hair and on the garment worn by the shooter at that time?
You most definitely would have found gunshot residue on the target surface. That would have been the head and the hair.
Did you find any evidence whatsoever of any gunpowder on any of those slides that you examined?
No.
And you're certain to that, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Lise Bias's father.
My full name is Chester Anthony Gazrowski.
Can you tell me what that is a photograph of?
Myself on a tractor towing an airplane, and the tool shed my daughter and I were building.
Now, your daughter, Chester, was left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed.
And when you say that you and your daughter built the tool shed together, can you tell the jury when it was that you began construction of the tool shed?
Approximately 5 years ago, I decided to put on an addition, and we started putting it up. We drew up plans, me and her, and started putting it together. I had nobody to help me because my son lived in Colorado. So my daughter, Lise, she helped.
Okay. Now, what did Lise do besides help you draw up the plans? Physically, what did she do?
Lift 4x8 sheets up onto the roof, nailed that roof with me.
And what hand did she use, Chester?
A right.
Defense attorney Elizabeth Smith calls a medical professional who treated Lise Bias when she was brought to Warren County Hospital 2 years earlier.
She told me that there was an argument tonight with her husband, and she became angry and threatened to shoot herself with her husband's gun. She says that these arguments happen about twice a year. She said that she was no longer feeling suicidal. Mr. Bias agreed that arguments were infrequent, but have led to these suicidal thoughts.